So welcome everyone to the Radiant Torah of Rebbe Nachman, in which we discuss the weekly parsha with insights and commentary from Rebbe Nachman of Breslov, as well as our sages and tzaddikim. And we would like to thank Dr. Eleanor Gudis for sponsoring this weekly shir. We have almost completed all the parshas. We didn't get to one or two of them last year, and we are now unbelievably in our second year. So thank you, Eleonora. May it be a source of merit and bracha and hatzlacha for you and your family, and for everyone who's interested in the teachings, the uplifting teachings, which we are all in need of Rebbe Nachman. So this week's Torah portion is Parshat Behar. And this is a parsha that juxtaposes two very different on the surfaces set of commandments. The first set of commandments are related to the Shemittah year, which we have discussed in detail in the past. And the second set of commandments and concepts in this parsha are related to the laws of fraud and usury and things like this. There are also some other concepts in the parsha, such as the laws of servants and slaves and so on. Why do we have these two juxtapositions? The laws of Shmitta, the laws of Sabbatical, and the laws about how we should treat our fellow Jews in terms of monetarily treating them in business, and so on. And as we go through the parsha today, bit by bit, we're not going to cover everything. Hopefully this will become clear to us. So first we will begin with the opening verse, which is Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Bahar Sinai Lemor. And the Lord spoke to Moshe on Har Sinai, on Mount Sinai, saying, and then the Hashem speaks about the Shabbos of Shmitta, the Shabbos to Hashem. So why Har Sinai? Why bring up Mount Sinai? Okay, what's the point? There were many instances throughout the parsha that Mount Sinai was not specific, throughout the Torah that Mount Sinai was not specifically brought up in relation to the parsha. However, we have some interesting insights from Rashi. Rashi explains that the reason Mount Sinai is brought up teaches us something very valuable. What we have to understand about Rashi, many of you have learned Torah with Rashi, but some of you haven't, is that Rashi deals with the Pshat. The Pshat, sometimes we translate as just the literal meaning of the Torah, but it's much more than that. It means not only the literal meaning, but the simple meaning that we can deduce from the words of Torah. So when we get a Rashi, it's usually an answer to a question that an astute reader or student would ask based on the parsha, like I just asked. I'm not so astute, but like I just asked, why bring up Mount Sinai? Okay, why bring up Mount Sinai? So the reason is as follows. Rashi says that it's meant to show us that all the details of all the commandments originate from Mount Sinai. All the laws, with all their details, with all their intricate minutiae, were said by Hashem to Moshe on Sinai, and everything comes from there. Now, when we think of Mount Sinai, or when the world at large thinks of Mount Sinai, they think of the 10 Commandments. But we have to remind ourselves that the 10 Commandments are really just the barest outline of the mitzvot. And then we get to the Talmud, which gives us more of the details of the mitzvot, as well as the Shulchan Aruch, which goes into fine details and fine points. Until today, we have books on the mitzvot, on the halachos, the details of the laws that are so focused. For example, I just recently bought a sefer on the laws of not putting a stumbling block before the blind. There's a whole sefer just on that and what that means, what that entails, with all its minutia. So what we have to understand that all these details come from and were told to Moshe on Sinai. And we have to set aside this concept that is really not such a Jewish concept, this idea that somehow there were a bunch of rabbis later on who somehow came up with more intricate laws. That's not what we're told. That's not what Rashi tells us. Hashem told and taught Moshe all the laws. And the rabbis expressed these to us, explicated these to us, elaborated on them. The rabbis, they argued about the details of them and so on, but the nut of all the laws, along with the details, were from Sinai. And this is an important point. Also, what we want to understand, and this is also something from the Chasam Sofer, is that this chapter really is not just about the Shmittah laws, the laws of the sabbatical 7 years, but it's also about the years before Shmittah and the years after Shmittah. And the Chasam Sofer says it's a guarantee that the crops previous to Shmittah will be large enough. Excuse me, I just have to let someone in to some of the people in the waiting room. The crops will be large enough to support, great enough in amount to support people through the Shemitah year and through the next year when the crops weren't ready to be harvested. So the Chasam Sofer says something beautiful. He says, if a human being were inventing a commandment, if you and I all got together, we had a cup of coffee and we sat down and we wanted to set up a bunch of commandments, we want to make our own religion and our own rules for humanity or for the Jewish people, this is not a law we would come up with, because it's a law that can very easily be disproven. It's a law, the laws of Shemitah. Excuse me, somebody else is signing in. Sorry about that. We miss our Charlene, who used to do all this for us. The laws of Shemitah, okay, are so that you have to be Hashem to know and to make this guarantee. Without Hashem making this guarantee, there is no way that this could come true, as, by the way, are many other laws in the Torah, which as we go through more and more this year, maybe we'll touch on some of them. So we see today we're coming to, it's a little more than the midpoint of a Shemitah year. All the farmers who have held to this halacha in Israel, they're more and more each year. It's so beautiful. More and more each year, farmers with simple emunah, who spend the year in a sabbatical. What are they doing during this year? Are they running other businesses? Not necessarily. What they're doing is they're sitting and learning Torah. And through our donations, they're able to do this, but still it doesn't necessarily meet their minimum requirements. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And they are relying on their bumper crop in the previous year, and the fact that this year also will be the coming year will also be a year of blessing for them. It's quite amazing. Can you imagine? I mean, what a greater expression of emunah and bitachon and trust. This is literally saying, I trust I don't have to lift a finger. Hashem's going to take care of me. And it's for us, it's really a lesson in what it means to have not only emunah, not only faith in Hashem, but bitachon, this idea that I have a level of faith, so much so in Hashem that I understand that the work I do, and here's the hint in the parsha, it's not such a hint, it's more obvious than a hint, 6 days a week can be stopped on the 7th day, and it will not hurt me financially at all. Now, I was reading something over Shabbos about I believe it was the Baba Sali who lived in Morocco, and in his town, he told his businessmen only engage in business Yom Rishon, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Learn Torah Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and have a beautiful Shabbos, have a beautiful Shabbat. And they all followed him. They all had complete faith in this, so they listened to him. Then when he moved to Netivot, to Israel, okay, they stopped. We don't have the tzaddik here, so we have to work more, okay? And others fell away because, because it was like, well, now I can work more. And what they found to a man, okay, based on the story I was reading, what they found to a man, or to a woman too, there were some business women as well, what they found was they didn't make any more money by working 6 days a week. Okay, they had so much trust in the tzaddik. And this, of course, is another lesson to us. We are following the laws given to us by Hashem, but given to us by Moshe. And Moshe was, of course, the ultimate tzaddik. And when we trust in the laws of Moshe, when we follow his laws, we can rely on them absolutely. Not only as a representative of Hashem, but also as someone who has a connection with Hashem, who heard what we should be doing directly from Hashem. It's quite amazing. Okay. So this is something to keep in mind when we connect to our tzaddikim, Rebbe Nachman of Breslov and others. Okay. So there's more about Shmitta, and we are not going to we're going to try to do different. There's so much on Shmitta, we don't have to cover the same thing even if we did this 30 years, we don't have to. So I'm going to skip around a little bit, and I would like to share with you a little bit about what Reb Noson says about Shmitta. And it's very beautiful. After Adam ate from the Eitz Hadas, okay, the tree, he received a curse. His curse was, you have to work the land. If you want to eat, you got to work, okay? Before, there was no such thing. Everything grew on trees. And the mitzvah of Shmitta is a rectification for Adam's sin. And this involves also the sanctity of Shabbos. It's a larger reflection over time and over space, over land, of the Shabbat, okay? Because just as we are forbidden to work on Shabbat, we are forbidden to work the land during Shemittah. Now, here is this connection with what I said in the beginning, with our relationships with human beings, with each other, to the Shemittah year. Reb Noson says that during the Shemittah, okay, the land, the produce that's grown is declared hefker, which means ownerless. So if you want to get rid of something, let's say you have old furniture and you no longer want it, okay, you could sell it, or you could bring it to, let's say, a place where there was like a secondhand shop, a charity shop or somewhere, and you could put it there and say, this is ownerless now. Whoever wants it can come take it. Same with the produce of the land, okay? So that people can technically go and go to a farmer's land, and they can take the produce. It's hefker. Nobody owns it. Today there are, I don't want to go into the details because it's complicated. Not everybody holds by this, but there's certain ways in which certain produce might be sold. I think we spoke about that in detail last year. But anyway, everyone is allowed to take what he wants from any field for his personal use. This, says Reb Noson, is the key to the rectification, the tikkun for Adam's sin, because Adam sought to separate himself from Hashem by defying his commandment not to eat from the tree. However, when we observe the Shemitah year, we are really, like I said in the beginning, expressing such emunah and bitachon in Hashem, such faith and trust. We are making a profound declaration of our allegiance to Hashem and his mitzvot. And then we also are declaring ourselves one with our fellow Jews. Because if all property, if all produce is ownerless, and there's also other laws about leases that revert back and loans that are canceled and so on during the Shemitah year, then we are all united. And this is really very beautiful. Also, we don't have, says Reb Noson, we will have no one has any objection to sharing things with other people because there are no owners. And slaves are set free and so on. And what this means is a rejection of servitude. What is this idea of servitude? Okay, servitude is doing something because you're compelled to. Okay, I'm not talking about servitude to Hashem, that's different, but to other people, we're compelled to. We have to do it. We may be paid or not paid, but it's something that puts us in two very different levels, the servant and the boss. Okay, when everything is hefker and every servant is released and there's no ownership, we are all equal. Now, what does this sound like? Okay. This sounds like the pipe dream of socialism or communism, okay? This idea that we're all brothers, comrade. We all own everything together. And indeed, the secular state of Israel, the secular government, was based on these kinds of premises. It was actually, socialism is really like communism one step less. It was really on socialistic practices, which is why there were kibbutzim and so on, why the kibbutz began today. Kibbutzim, by the way, are very rich. They're a very different situation. But this idea of, oh, we're all comrades and we're all equal and there is no ownership, isn't this beautiful? Okay, so we all read Animal Farm, and we know that some animals are more equal than others. Usually the people setting this stuff up end up being more equal than others. So what is this a commentary on? This is an argument that many people make. They say, well, in the Torah, if you look at this, it espouses socialism, certainly in the Shemitah year. Isn't that the ideal? So the answer is no. First of all, there are many, many laws related to ownership the rest of the 6 years, okay? And secondly, that seventh year doesn't just represent Shabbat, it also represents the Messianic era, when the world will have been redeemed, okay? Keep that word in mind, and then it begins to make sense with setting servants free and so on. The world will have been redeemed. We will have a true king who's a representative of Hashem, who's a tzaddik, who isn't going to be more equal than others. I mean, he will be at a higher level spiritually, but he's not going to be, you can have this stuff, but I'm going to take all this other stuff. And when we get to that point, we will hopefully be spiritually ready to embrace this concept of the correct terms for ownership and the correct terms for unity. Okay, we most movements, if you look at most political movements, ideological movements, those that claim to be utopian. I'm not talking about Genghis Khan coming and just, I'm going to conquer and I'm going to take. But those that claim to be utopian, like socialism, communism, federalism, okay, democracy, democratic republicanism, and so on. If you look at these various ideologies, they are all utopian and they cannot exist in a world in which the possibility is that some animals are a little more equal than other animals, as George Orwell so wonderfully and eloquently hit the nail on the head. Okay, so it's important, I think it's important to understand that while we get all our lessons from the Torah, everything is in there, all the wisdom is in there. Some wisdom is for some times, some wisdom is for some places, and some wisdom is not. Okay, which is when we take the teachings, let's say of a tzaddik, we're going to take Rebbe Nachman of Breslov as an example. Sometimes some of his lessons seem to, if not outright contradict each other, at least bring up opposing points to each other. So what do we follow? Everything is dependent upon who you are, where you are. Okay, everything, as a person, as a Jew, as a human being. So there are a lot of nuances and they're very, very important. And while as a whole, we have to pay attention to the mitzvot, as individuals, there's fine tuning and details that may be incumbent upon some and not so much on others. All the mitzvot are incumbent upon all of us, but the details, I'm talking about the fine tuning and the stringencies and so on. And so we want to keep in mind this idea that each of us is an individual. When we truly accept that, that's when we can have real unity. That's when we can have real unity. It's like a baseball team. You have the batter, you have the top batter, you have the pitcher, you have the catcher who's making all those little hand movements that are telling the pitcher what to pitch. You have the infielders, you have the outfielders, and so on. And each person has their different role, their different strengths, and their different weaknesses. And each person, when you train for a sport, again, baseball is an example, it's an easy example. When you train for a sport, you know what you're training for. You know that if you are the catcher, you better have good hamstrings. You better be good at squatting and good at memorizing all these little signals and so on. And you better be very limber and have very broad reach to catch foul balls and so on. So you have to know your strengths, you have to know your weaknesses, but at the same time, there are still the rules of the game. I'm not comparing Torah to baseball. I'm just giving an example. Okay. All right. We're going to continue. You see? Yeah, I didn't really get very far. Okay. Next, I would like to talk about the power of 7. Okay. Rather than go into the laws of Shmitta this time, let's talk a little bit about the power of 7, because we see this, that we have in the Torah the 6 days of the week, and we have the 7th day, Shabbat. The 7th is always set aside as special. We have the 6 years and we have the 7 years. Okay, right now, we are in the period between Pesach and Shavuot. Okay, we are counting 49 days. We're counting the days of 7 times 7, 7 weeks, until we get to the festival of Shavuot, which has many meanings and a few names. But what does it mean literally? It means weeks, the Feast of Weeks, and a week is a 7. Where does this idea of weeks come from? This idea of weeks only comes from the Torah, yet it's a universal. Most of the world today, virtually everybody has a 7-day week, but most of the world had a 7-day week. Why? Why a 7-day week? Why are days important? They're not. Months are important. The month coming in, we could see with a moon, this is how people calculated their calendars. But why did most cultures, not all, have a 7-day week? Because it's a universal embedded in us, and it's a reflection of Hashem's design for life on earth and our time on earth. This is teaching us something important, this idea of 7. And we're going to cover some of the 7s to discuss. Okay. The 7th is beloved to Hashem, says the Midrash. So first of all, there are 7 heavens. Okay. That expression, oh, I'm in 7. Oh, this cake's so delicious, I'm in 7th heaven. No, that's actually a real thing. There are 7 heavens. Okay, the highest of which is the most beloved to Hashem, the one which Hashem chooses as his abode, although we know Hashem is everywhere. Also, the world is divided into 7 regions, and this is fascinating. There are, okay, the Midrash tells us that the world is comprised of 1/3 inhabited areas, 3 places there, 1/3 wilderness, excuse me, not 3 places, 1/3 inhabited areas, 1/3 wilderness, and 1/3 oceans, okay? And there are 7 types of regions, and I'm going to quickly go over them because it's interesting, okay? Eretz is a collective name for all countries with a mild climate whose fruit ripens quickly. And Eretz is related to the Hebrew word ratz, which means to run or to rush or hurry, okay? And that's because the fruit ripens quickly. Next, Adama is the name for countries with a cold climate, and Adama is a hint to this idea of clods of earth that are stuck together because it's cold. If you've ever dug a garden out, you know that when it's warm and moist, the earth crumbles gently, but if it's winter, it's going to break apart in chunks, clods. Okay, next, the name Arka refers to hot countries whose fruits, because of the intense heat, shrink and wither. And Arka is related to the word Reich, which means empty. And those are the inhabited regions. Then we get to the wilderness. Gai, which is valley. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the uninhabited places. Sia, which is an empty place, a wilderness that has no fertility. And then Neshia, which is deserts, which are even deserted by people. Okay. Then we have the 7th type of place, that is Taival. And Taival refers to the word mitubeles, which means spiced or spicy. And that refers to Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. Why? Because the land of Israel contains in it the flavors of all the beautiful fruits of the world and all the spices. It's so sweet and fragrant, spiritually speaking, and even physically speaking. We know today how much produce Israel produces. Okay, now we're also going to cover some more 7s, okay, which I think is quite interesting. The first verse of Torah, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ves haaretz, has 7 words. Okay. The leaders of the generations of mankind. Okay. There were 7, and the 7th was special. There was Adam, Shes, Enosh, Kainan, Mahalalel, Yered, and Chanoch. We know Chanoch is one of the special people, the special prophets who didn't really die. He entered heaven alive. Okay, what that means, it's a whole other conversation. Also the Ushpizin, okay, from Sukkot, our Sukkot guests, which don't go in chronological order. They go in the order of the 7 lower sephiros, which I'm going to discuss in a moment. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, Yosef, and David. Now, we are in this period where we are immersed in the 7 sephiros. Each day is an aspect of one of the lower 7 sephiros, and each week is the entirety of that sephira. Okay, so those, and we'll be talking more about this tonight when we talk about the sephiros, okay, sephirot, and those are Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, okay, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus. And these sephiros are Hashem's emanations, expressions of, we could call it aspects of Hashem, although Hashem is one in a unity. It's hard to describe them as aspects, but expressions of certain types of energy that we not only can relate to and use as lessons for ourselves and so on, but we can engage with both spiritually and intellectually. Okay, and by spiritually, I'm including emotionally in there. Okay, so we have the Ushpizin I mentioned also go in the order of the Sephirot. Okay, we also have something interesting that Shevat Haminim, the 7 species of Israel, which also go in the order of the Sephirot and correspond to them. And I'm going to tell you what those are. Okay, we have wheat, which is Chesed, which is loving kindness. It's giving, it's expansive. Okay, if you really want to be filled up, have a good piece of bread. Many people, the older generations especially, say a meal, it's in the Torah, a true meal includes bread, but just as a physical feeling, a meal isn't a meal without bread. For many of the older generation, this is true. I have a friend whose father passed away, actually, it's almost his yard site, which was on Shavuos several years ago. And he was a survivor of the war and very special person who lived to a very great old age. And he called the bread that you can buy today, he called it air bread. He couldn't eat it. Okay, he just couldn't eat it because it wasn't produced through slow fermentation process in which it breaks down all the nutrients. And when you have that real bread, one piece fills you up. Okay, so Chesed is expansive, wheat is expansive. The next grain, the next fruit of the 7 species of Israel is barley, which corresponds to Gevurah, which is severity. Okay, and the Gevurah, okay, also corresponds to restraint and strength. Why barley? Barley is a crop that can grow in it doesn't need the best soil to grow in. It's a rough crop. We learned last week or the week before that, I think last week, that it's a crop that's given to animals. Okay, so it's a rough and ready crop. It's a strong crop. And it's a crop that supplies animal strength. And of course, it's for the Omer. The next of the species is grapes, which corresponds to Tiferes or Tiferet, which is harmony, beauty, compassion, a unity of loving kindness and strength and restraint. And grapes are beautiful fruit. Okay, clusters of grapes are, if you look at any Renaissance still lifes, or beyond Renaissance, I should say, actually 18th and 19th century still lifes as well, they always include clusters of grapes. Are considered a beautiful fruit, a nutritious fruit. Okay. Next we have figs for Netzach. Netzach is eternal, it's victory, it's endurance, it's perseverance. Figs are a fruit that grow, and figs are a tree that produce fruit again and again and again. It's almost like they're eternal. Here in Brooklyn, in the Italian neighbors, everybody has a fig tree in their yard. Here also, in Borough Park, some people have fig trees in their yard. They come back and produce fruit year after year after year. I don't even know if they die. Okay, they're very abundant. Okay, and they hang in there. Next, we have pomegranates, rimon. A rimon is a pomegranate. And this corresponds to hod. Okay, hod is translated sometimes as humility, but it's also translated as splendor and majesty. A pomegranate is a beautiful round fruit with a little crown on top, corresponding to majesty. Obviously, there's a lot more to this. I'm just giving you a brief overview. Next, we have olives, which correspond to yesod, okay, which is the foundation, and it's the organs of procreation and generation and generative organs. And so we know that olives also are something that withstand all kinds of conditions. Olives are even beyond netzach. Olives represent a tree that can last a very, very, very long time, maybe even thousands of years, they say. Okay. Olives contain everything. They contain oil. They contain a fruit to eat. The oil can be used not just for food, but for your skin, to light candles and so on. They are also a plant sometimes representing wisdom, as is wheat. And then we get to dates, which represent malchut, royalty, sovereignty, kingship, which sometimes corresponds to the feet, but often corresponds to the mouth. And this is where everything in the world comes out and is expressed. And dates are another one of those amazing, amazing plants and trees. The date palm, okay, the tamar, okay, the tamar is quite an amazing fruit. It is a representative of the connection between heaven and earth. And if you've ever seen one of those very, very tall palm trees, they soar to the heavens. They really look very impressive. And they represent Hashem's majesty on earth. Okay, that's a little taste of the 7 fruits of Israel. Okay, what else? 7s, the prophetesses, Sarah, Miriam, Devorah, Hannah, Abigail, and Huldah, and Esther. Okay, let's see. I have so many 7s. I'm not going to do all of them. The 7 main holidays: Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Hanukkah, Purim, Pesach, and Shavuot. Okay, let's see. The 7 days of celebration following a wedding, Sheva Brachot. Okay, 7 meals. The meals after the chuppah is one of them. Then you have 6 more, and they're a big deal. And depending on your community, they can be almost as fancy as the wedding itself. So for 7 nights, the bride and groom, often very exhaustedly, have to come, and they sit and they get their blessings at the end of the meal. It's a very happy, joyous occasions. Really nothing like it. Very special. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have Shiva, sitting in mourning for someone for 7 days. Okay. So we had just like an overview of these 7s, and many of the Kabbalistic commentaries and other commentaries on this parsha refer to these ideas, because Shmitta is sort of, in a way, the ultimate of the concept of 7. Now, Shmitta also means, I wanted to tell you this in the beginning, I just remembered now, and I forgot, also means a letting go or a release. Okay, that's what it literally means. Okay, the word Shmitta. And that letting go is that, again, that making the land ownerless, or the produce of the land ownerless. Things are hefker. They're free for people who need and who want. Okay. Next. So much goodies in this parsha. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about those laws that I mentioned that are connected in a way to the concept of Shmitta. And these are the ideas of how to treat your fellow Jew, especially where it concerns money matters business and charity and so on. And you could see that obviously Shmitta unifies us. And then there are no accidents. Of course, the Torah comes in and really hammers home this idea of how we should treat one another. Really, how should we treat one another? We should speak kindly to each other, respectfully each other, give each other the benefit of the doubt. We all know this. Okay, we all already know this. But we all need reminders. We all need reminders. I just signed up for 40 days. I always sign up for these things because I need the reminders, and I want to make myself conscious of it for 40 days at noon every day, to not talk Lashon Hara for an hour. Okay. So hopefully I don't talk Lashon Hara at all. I don't talk bad about someone at all, but it happens. I'm also human. And it's also one of the big, unfortunately, one of the big taivas, one of the big desires of people is to not say something nice about someone. Okay. So every day I get this reminder and this little teaching, and then from noon to 1, I have to be extra careful, extra careful to not listen or talk about anything negative about someone else. And I have to tell you, reminding ourselves again and again and again is the only way to hammer it home. It's like if you're going to learn the piano, you have to practice. If you're going to learn Shmiras Halashon, the way to guard your mouth, and also if you're going to learn how to treat other people, we have to practice. We have to remind ourselves. This stuff doesn't necessarily come so naturally. Okay, it really just doesn't. If it came naturally, we wouldn't have to be so instructed in it all the time. Okay, all right. So during the year of the Yovel, the Jubilee year, which is the 50th year after the period of 7 Shemitah years, right? The 49 and so on. Then it's the 50th year. Every man is returned his own property. Okay. And when you make a sale then the immediate law following that is when you make a sale to your fellow Jew or make a purchase from the hand of your fellow Jew, you should not wrong one another. So when you sell something to someone, you want to make sure it's in good condition, and you want to make sure you're not misrepresenting the condition it's in. Okay. And you also want to make sure that you're charging them a fair amount. And when you purchase something from somebody, the same thing. There's actually a law that if you can buy something from a Jew, okay, let's say a Jewish-owned business, you should, as long as it's comparable to what you could get at a non-Jewish business. But the caveat is that if you could get it for more than a third less, you're allowed to buy it from a non-Jew. Okay, but we have to all support each other. We have to not just go only for the bargain. We have to think, what is this going to mean to my fellow Jew? Can I do the person a favor and really give them the proper value for something? Can I help support them? Okay, a Jew here probably has 12 kids in yeshiva. So it's a very big mitzvah to help them, and so on. Okay. Then there's some more laws. Let me see. I don't have time for all of them. Oh, we should not take from him interest, okay, and increase. Okay, so these laws are that a Jew should not charge a Jew interest for a loan, and a Jew should not take out a loan in which he pays interest to a Jew. So what happens when you have a Jewish bank? Okay, which we do in Israel. And what happens when you have a business, a Jewish loan business? How does somebody in the loan business, the only way to make money is with interest. So there are certain ways in which you can engage with your fellow Jew in this area of charging interest or paying interest. However, they're very strictly delineated, and you have to go to a rabbi, and draw up a contract that is not in violation of halacha. Okay, and obviously there's a lot of minutia here. Overall, it's just better not to pay a Jew interest. Okay. Today, we have so many it's called a gamach. A gamach is, in essence, a free loan society. Okay, and they abound. If you ever get a phone book from, let's say, Jewish Brooklyn, or very Jewish Jerusalem, Geula and Me'asharim and so on, you will see page after page of this thing called a gamach. They don't just give free loans, meaning you get the money and you pay it back. Okay, no interest. But they also give anything that is kept for your fellow Jew. Okay, I've mentioned this before in the past, but they will be wedding dresses that can be found for free at a gamach. Okay, I mentioned before that I had an event here and I had to get chairs from a gamach. Whatever it is that you could pop, baby formula today. Okay, today with a shortage of baby formula, okay, it's not such a bad idea. They're baby formula gamach. Somebody needs baby formula. They can't get it. They can't afford it. There's a person who runs a baby formula gamach. Very often these gamachs are run in people's basements, okay, or in their homes somewhere, in a corner of the home somewhere. So anything you need that you can't otherwise obtain, you can get generally for free. Okay, all right. Next. Okay. If your brother becomes destitute with you, okay, do not work him with slave labor. Okay, how you treat a non-Jew also has to be with respect and courtesy, and not to work them to the point of exhaustion. But with a Jew, if you acquire a Jewish slave, today we don't have this. It's more like an indentured servant than really a slave. Okay, it's just it's the translation often says slave. Okay. You have to make sure they're fed before you. You have to make sure that they have a nice pillow to sleep on. You have to make sure that you don't overwork them. You have to be solicitous of their needs. It turns out that having a servant is a big burden and a big responsibility. Okay, let's see. Okay, then also we have in here an obligation to put a needy Jew back on his or her feet. So if your brother becomes poor and his means fail him, you should support him, even if he is a ger, a convert, a ger toshav. I'm going to explain what that is in a minute, so that he may live with you. Okay, so we have an obligation to extend financial aid, either as a loan or as out and out just gift, charity, tzedakah, to a person who lacks means. We have an obligation. Every one of us has an obligation. No matter how poor you are, there's always someone poor. Okay, all have an obligation. And what is this idea? Even if he's a ger or a ger toshav. So I want to speak about this briefly, because this concept of ger toshav is very interesting. A ger is a righteous convert. Today we have many gerim, people who convert to Judaism before Mashiach comes. Okay, many souls are awakening and converting to Judaism. Why? Because when Mashiach comes, we're not going to be able to accept any more converts. Okay, the door's closed then. You can still be a righteous Gentile, but you can't convert after Mashiach comes. So we see, especially in the last, it seems like the last 20 years, there's been a very great increase in the number of sincere converts. Okay, that's number one. I don't mean people are converting for expediency, and that's a whole other issue. And then we have this concept of a ger toshav. What is a ger toshav? A ger toshav is related to yeshuv and yeshev, somebody who dwells in the land. This is somebody, in those days, there was this designation called somebody who dwelled in the lands, a Gentile, who fulfilled the 7 Noahide laws. Why is this important? So in Israel today, the government, unfortunately, has been for the past few decades bringing in a lot of non-Jews. Okay. And so much so that I even know people who found a swastika not carved by an Arab, but by someone from Eastern Europe who maybe had a good, they think he had like a Jewish great grandmother. His parents were brought in and he became wildly anti-Semitic. And this is a fact that we've imported people into Israel who really hate us. They're not Jewish and they hate us. We've also imported people into Israel who absolutely love Israel and who embrace not only gerus on occasion, they convert, but also this concept of a ger toshav, which is someone who lives in the land of Israel and follows the 7 Noahide laws. Here in America and outside of Israel, you may have heard of Noahides, and there are some. There may even be some in this class. I don't know. I know there used to be a lovely family that used to come that were Noahides, and not to this class, but to other classes. And a Noahide is someone who believes the Torah is true and says, well, Hashem made me a non-Jew, but I can follow the laws that are incumbent upon all of mankind. And they're incumbent upon all of mankind. Okay. And these laws are, I want to share them with you. Okay. These I actually have, just have to find them. I don't have them memorized. Okay. The first law for a Noahide is to establish laws. All non-Jews, by the way, when I say a Noahide, everybody who isn't a Jew should be a Noahide. We believe that. We don't believe that people have to convert to Judaism. We don't feel that's the only way that you can have spiritual achievement and spiritual reward. But our Torah tells us that there are still laws that all mankind must follow. And the reason they're called Noahide laws is because they're named after Noah. Okay, so the first law is to establish laws, to establish courts and laws and justice. And they have to be what most people would consider fair. They can't be extremely lenient, and they can't be extremely the opposite, extremely oppressive. And most people have to agree that these are good laws. Now, when we look at the laws of the founding fathers, it's quite amazing. Not only the concepts that they expressed, but the actual, let's say, the Constitution is and the way that we can make amendments to it and not make it's quite amazing. Very, very fair, even by Torah standards. I'm not saying they're Torah, but they're fair by Torah standards. Okay, quite an accomplishment. Many people think that the founding fathers of America were actually Noahides, and it's quite interesting because they mention God a lot, but they don't mention the Christian so-called Messiah. So fascinating that they don't mention it. That was a later development. Okay, next. Law number 2, don't blaspheme. Don't curse Hashem, God forbid. Okay, don't curse your creator. Okay, so we know that we have the Tower of Babel, the Tower of Babel, okay, and the people climbed up and they wanted to conquer Hashem. Cursing Hashem is a form of conquering Hashem. I would add to this to not curse God. I would say that would include something that I mentioned previously in a previous class, which is the core of anti-Semitism is a rejection of Hashem. You can't really hate Hashem. So what do? You become an anti-Semite. You hate Hashem's children. Same thing. Don't curse the Jewish people either. I would include that. Okay, next, do not practice idolatry. Now, it's very interesting. Some people say that there is a division between this idea of worshiping idols, practicing idolatry and doing all that worship. Nobody's allowed to do that, and believing in idols. They say that it might be difficult to not believe in idols, but one still must not practice and worship idols. It's very interesting because we see, especially with this idea of Christianity, we see this temptation to I want to call it temptation, this foundation of this idea that belief is everything. Okay. If you believe, that's it. So there is a presumption of believing in idolatry. That is the first step of the Christian religion. Okay. Believing in an idol. And technically, the rabbis question, there's a discussion about it, whether a Gentile who believes this but doesn't practice anything idolatrous, whether they can be included as a Noahide. Okay. Most of the rabbis say, no, they can't be. Okay. Next, do not engage in immoral relationships. So let me tell you the relationships that Rambam outlines that Noahides are not, Noahides, non-Jews, period, are not allowed to engage in. I shouldn't just limit it to Noahides because everybody should be one. This is a Noahide may not have a relationship with his mother, with his father's wife, with another man's wife, with his sister from the same mother, with another male, or with an animal, obviously. Okay. For Jews, we have much more restrictive relationship guidelines. Okay. So these are still restrictive compared to many cultures in the world, by the way. All right. Next on my list here. Okay. Do not participate in bloodshed. Don't murder. Okay. Don't kill anyone. All right. Now, people say, Rambam said this at the time, I don't know who else said it, that Islam is a monotheistic religion, and therefore they qualify as Noahides. But when your religion says murder is a good thing, I don't think so. Okay. So we have to really understand that bloodshed is a no-no for everyone. Okay. Next, don't rob. Don't take what's not yours. Don't steal. Don't scam people. By the way, these 7 laws have details. There are people today who have made very intricate lists of all the details. You can look it up. I haven't read all the details. I'm just giving you an overview. Next, do not eat flesh from a living animal. Do not hurt an animal and eat it while it's alive and so on. There are cultures that do that. Okay. There are cultures that will eat, when it's really gross, but living insects, living shellfish, and so on. This is considered, I wouldn't say it's as much cruelty as savagery. Why? So you're hurting an animal. We shouldn't hurt animals, but beyond that, something interesting. When we do that, why shouldn't you hurt an animal? For the animal's sake? Yes, of course, they're a life, but for our sake too, as human beings. Because if a human being gets into these savage practices, it lowers our level of humanity. We get inured to this idea that we have the power to, God forbid, cause pain or inflict pain or cruelty on another being. So those are basically the 7 Noahide laws. Let me see. Okay. And then I actually want to say one more final point. I mentioned about when you do business with someone, be honest, be fair, and so on. And I skipped something that Reb Noson said. I really want to share with you. It's very powerful and beautiful. He says, all cheating results from the negative imagination. If we would realize consciously, intellectually, that eventually we'll have to make an accounting to Hashem. We'll say, oh, Hashem, this is what I've done in my life. Okay, we would never allow ourselves to cheat others. But because we very easily fall prey to our own imagination, our own illusion, we fall into the trap of cheating others. And Reb Noson says, perhaps even worse, we cheat and fool ourselves too. So it's just like with animals. Yes, we're hurting the animal, but we're hurting ourselves too. So this chapter gives us this consciousness of the idea of becoming more aware of our relationships with other people, our relationships with the land, our relationships with time, our relationships with Hashem, in order to ultimately not only have a relationship with Hashem, but improve ourselves, elevate ourselves to the level of what the Torah calls an Adam, a human being. Okay, there are many names for a person, a man in Hebrew, but an Adam, a mensch, a good person, is someone who not only understands that there are actions, the negative actions, as well as the positive, will affect others, but will also affect ourselves at a very deep level. So that's Parshat Behar. I'm glad you joined me today. I want to thank Dr. Eleanor Agudas again. Next week, we have the Hukosai, which is a fascinating parsha. And tonight at 8 p.m. Daylight Savings Time in New York. Okay, New York time, we will be discussing the Sephira, the period of Sephiras HaOmer, this individual Sephirot, Lag BaOmer, Rebbe Nachman, and of course, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And I hope you will join me for that. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Chaya Rivka.
Oh, gee, it's so good to see you. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm working.
Yeah.
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm